So about a month ago, I went to an old hammer event called Bring Out Your Lead, which was hosted by Foundry Miniatures. While I was there, I picked up this fantastic set of metal minis, Kuraneth and their Siege Orcubus crew. The moment I saw them, I knew that they would be a perfect match for my Turnip Regiment, the Red Cap Rotters, as this war cult is inspired by the animated series Over the Garden Wall. I wanted a model to represent Wirt's younger brother, Greg, Wirt being the Toff I made in a previous video. When I saw that the main miniature, Kuraneth, had a teapot on its waistband, along with all the other miscellaneous items they've picked up, I knew this was my Greg, and I got a bunch of bonus fodder to boot. While I was confident I could sculpt over these metal minis, I had never actually worked with metal before in regards to war games, and so I spent a good amount of time hesitating and just appreciating all the incredible detail on these figures before finally moving on to convert them. Now, Toadies are sub-commanders under your Toff in Turnip28, and each Toadie gets a regiment of followers that come along with them. Traditionally, you only need one to play the game, but you and your opponent can agree on any number of Toadies for a game. So, lucky for me, my friend Tina was also at Foundry that day, and gave me one of her original 3D printed miniatures, this fantastic frog holding a pipe. This little guy was immediately fated to become Jason Funderburker, parentheses, the frog. I did something a little different this time from my usual style of just rushing in and trying to get a project done. I actually spent some time getting appropriately sized bases for each model, having a play with how I wanted them posed, or if I wanted the fodder to share a base together. But once I was relatively happy with how each mini looked, I attached them to their respective bases first, so I would have a bit more of a handle when sculpting and eventually painting on them later. Starting with Greg's boomstick, I wanted to convert the barrel of this weapon to be a little bit more in the style of the concept art that Max has created for his game. I was honestly surprised how soft the metal was to clip through. Just using my regular snips, I was able to remove a section of the lower barrel, file some of the metal down with my hobby knife, and then I could come back and use my go-to combination of green stuff and milliput to add an exploded muzzle to the front of the rifle. In between working on other parts of this video, I came back when the clay had some time to firm up and carved in some battle damage to the front of the weapon. This tool that I'm using is a larger sewing needle that I've attached to a wooden handle by drilling a hole into the handle and then gluing it in. You're going to mostly see this tool along with a silicone shaper through the course of this video. The one time that the metal minis gave me some trouble was using my pin vise whenever I wanted to drill a hole, like when pinning them to their bases, for example. I was tempted to get my rotary tool out to help me drill faster, but I prefer to keep metal shavings down to a minimum whenever possible. To add a note on that topic, I would always advise wearing a mask of some kind when working with metal. These minis are perfectly safe to handle, but I did wash my hands each time I left my desk and thoroughly cleaned it afterwards. You can always replace tools, minis, and hobby supplies, but you can't replace you. Now, the next thing I wanted to tackle on Greg was updating their hat. The majority of my mercenary cult is going to be fitted out with pointed red caps, hence their name, and I think it's incredibly fitting that even after being reanimated by the root, or in this case, the Edelwood, that Greg would end up with the most extravagant and fantastic hat of all of my units. With a pin for some support and a mix of our epoxy clays, I used the aforementioned tools to secure the base of the hat first, and then shape the top of the hat into a classic wizard slouch just using my fingers. You can remove fingerprints by using hand moisturizer on the end of your tool and rolling it across the surface. Finally, I added a thin strip of clay to cover the seam where the clay and metal meet. To add a similarly shaped hat onto Jason, I followed pretty much the same steps as mentioned before, but I actually ended up doing this twice for our little amphibious friend. The first attempt on his cap just didn't spark joy. but I was pleasantly surprised with how well the 3D print survived all the drilling, poking, prodding, and eventually pulling when I removed the first hat, and repinned it to make the second one that you see here now. I was definitely more concerned about breaking this model with its thin little legs, but Jason held up like a champ. In addition to his pointy cap, I added some ear flaps on either side, largely just because I thought it looked cuter. This sewing needle sculpting tool has been a real game changer for me, and as of recording this video, I've made a full set of even smaller sewing needle tools, so I can hopefully continue to step up my miniature sculpting game. Now with any leftover clay that's starting to go off, I'm rolling them out into these irregular tentacle looking shapes, which I can use later as roots and nose guards for my helmets, and honestly just long turnipy looking noses for my rootlings. As this clay is certainly not cheap, and I refuse to waste any of it. Once these leftover pieces have fully cured, I select an appropriately sized tentacle and tack it onto Greg's face using some super glue. This is where the conversion is really starting to come together for me. With a little more green stuff over his eyes for the visor, I can push the clay with my silicone tool and carve in any details using the sewing needle. I'm confident that this nose will hold up fine for my purposes, and that I can fix it if there are any casualties. We can now finally pin and glue the barrels of the arquebus onto the rest of the gun. And just to add a little bit more texture, I'm gluing a strip of coffee filter paper onto the front. I framed the mini like this intentionally so you can see that all my additions have added to the silhouette in a way that isn't overbearing, and as the added bonus of making the model look more interesting. Last but certainly not least, to finish the bases on these toads, I've got a new go-to method. Dousing the plastic in super glue, I first put a layer of dried out coffee grounds, and then adding more glue in some areas, I sprinkle a layer of baking soda on top. This not only sets the super glue instantly, but adds a perfect ground texture. It's also important to do all of this over a piece of paper, which helps reduce on your mess, and you can more easily collect any bits of ground cover and put them back in your container. Oh hey, what's this? An ad for my book, The Catalog of Chaotic Commodities? That's so funny. I wonder how it got here. Well, I guess you should follow the link and check out my book when you're done with this video. But with that cleverly placed ad out of the way, it's probably not very surprising to hear that one of these models was easier to paint than the other. While I understand that, generally speaking, the move from lead to white metal miniatures in the late 90s, and then finally to resin after that, made a lot of people very angry and has been widely regarded as a bad move, I don't have the same strong feelings as other people in the hobby because I wasn't really allowed to play any of these games growing up, with the whole satanic panic era thing. And so I don't have the same nostalgia for metal minis. If you've ever seen any of my other videos, you also know that the painting process is something I also struggle with immensely. That being said, I am constantly watching tutorials by friends and other amazing painters in the hobby, and just trying new things so I can find as much joy in painting as I do sculpting. Some simple changes that I've made while learning start with priming. If you use rattle cans like me, you should be giving them a warm bath before spraying. Just 2 to 3 minutes in warm water will save you days of frustration or tacky and uncured paint activator, especially if you keep moving to damp and cold cities like I do. Another change I've recently made is I'm just not bothering with priming my models black. If I had an airbrush and had better control over the highlighting process, this might be a different story, but I like the way my models look with more vibrant colors. So at most, I'll do a coat of gray primer and then a coat of white. Speaking of moving to a new city, this also means I have more hobby paint options besides Citadel. I've started using the Duncan Rhodes 2 Thin Coats range, and it's been a real game changer for me. I feel like I have more control over my paints and I'm spending less time fixing mistakes. So a massive shout out to my supporters over on Patreon who give me the opportunity to try out new hobby supplies every once in a while. After realizing that the sun had gone down and that I now spent a full day on just painting these minis, I figured it was time to add some tufts and call it a day. Thank you so much for watching this video, subscribing to the channel, and supporting me where you can. There's some links in the description if you want to buy my RPG books, something from my wish list, or support me on Patreon for a behind-the-scenes look on what I'm up to. Until next time, bye!